Hello and welcome to your Daily Detroit, sharing what to know and where to go in Southeast Michigan. I am Jer Stays, and joining me on this Wednesday, October 4th is...
Norris Howard. How's it going?
Man, what a time to be alive. I feel like it's summer.
You know, everybody seems to be very happy about that, and I'm the only one sitting around in existential dread going, hey, it's 3 weeks till Halloween, and we haven't cut the heat on yet. That's a problem.
Oh, don't get me wrong. There's existential dread there. In fact, I'll say this. I am amazed at how many people actually are not caring at all. Like, they may mention it on some social media or whatever, but so many people kind of quietly are like, I kind of like this. And that kind of terrifies me.
Yeah, I'm not feeling that. One of the beautiful things about Michigan is all 4 seasons. And if autumn and spring are getting cut down to 2-week intervals, nah, I'm not feeling that.
So I'm not the only one who's noticed that.
Yeah.
Okay.
In my lifetime, I have seen a notable change between the distinct lack of spring and fall.
One of our listeners actually sent me some pictures. They're into trees, and they were actually showing me about the differences in trees that have happened over the last 20 years. I thought I was nuts, because I go to Belle Isle or I drive up north or whatever, and I'm like, I feel like the tree's green has changed or the tree setup has changed or whatever. And I'm not an expert. And they're like, yes, in fact, it has. You're not crazy. I'm like, oh, great. That sounds wonderful. Let's start Wednesday with some existential dread. Anyway.
The planet hates us.
Let's talk about some stories around town. That's what we're here for. And the feedback has been pretty big from that downtown Detroit episode that me and Devin did. I know that you have some thoughts over some things, but one thing that I wanted to bring up to you that I thought was interesting was the personal feedback through text messages or email or whatever, that people really resonated with the thing that I said, that downtown Detroit is a small town with tall buildings. I'm going to leave that with you because when I kept seeing that, I got that like 15 times, that hit them in a certain way. So I'm going to ask you, as a native Detroiter, how does it hit you?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call it a small town as much as I would call it a billionaire fiefdom. It is very much so an island unto itself in how it moves, operates, the general energy around it. And I mean, even you could separate Greektown from it, right? Because Greektown is at least 3 blocks of madness that is sort of separate from the rest of downtown, right? But as somebody who used to live down there, it is very much so its own thing. Even just living in Lafayette Park, which I lived after downtown, it was different. Vibes were different. People were different. You didn't see the same folks. And we're not talking about a place that was 5, 6, 7 miles away. We're literally talking about 2 blocks.
It's across that 375, which is much more of a barrier, I think, than people realize.
It is not just a physical barrier, it's an ideological barrier as well. It just separates downtown from everything else in the same way that 75 separates downtown from everything else. And it functions, I think, in many ways like a small town. But I think there are still some key elements that keep it from being that. I still don't think that there are really great places to get like full-blown groceries. And I still don't think that there is quite enough sort of all-age entertainment. Like, you could go downtown and not see children for like 2-3 days. And I think that is weird if we were talking about a full-blown community. So there are some elements, I think, that are not quite there yet, but it's getting there. And I think that that's actually an issue because it feels so disjointed from the rest of the city.
So you feel like it even feels disjointed from, say, Brush Park, Midtown, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you go to Midtown,
you see a lot more kids, that's for one.
You definitely see a lot more children, and you definitely just feel, the youthful energy that comes from Wayne State. I feel like Midtown is just much more of a neighborhood, you know what I mean? So it definitely feels a little bit more cohesive. But downtown more than anywhere else feels so separate from the rest of the city of Detroit because, being quite frank, it is separate from the rest of the city of Detroit. I mean, there's no real great ways to get down there without driving. And then when you drive, you got to go through the whole parking situation. And we all know how that goes for most people. So it is an island unto itself in many ways.
I can't help but think about this I-375 project, which now finally some people are starting to really kind of rethink a bit because they're looking at replacing that sunken freeway with a lot of lanes of traffic. And in that context, could there be a way to rethink that I-375 project where it's not just about, say, the freeway or in and out of the ballparks, but adjust for the fact that working life has changed and maybe even reconnect to the existing Lafayette Park? I know there's a lot of other issues involved, but maybe a reconnection to actual Lafayette Park and then connecting properly to Midtown, because one of the issues that some residents have is that it doesn't connect to the things that they need in Midtown, because a lot of things that they need aren't there. You need to be able to have those inter-neighborhood connections.
You know, I don't quite know how you connect it to Lafayette Park because there's a series of condos, those mid-century modern condos over there on Lafayette and a few other buildings that either would have to be, you know, bulldozed or
and that's
or
never happening.
And that probably ain't happening. But when we think about a large thoroughfare like they're proposing, I think of, you know, you got to think of roads like Gratiot, Grand River, Telegraph. We're talking about that size of a road here. And there's, you know, zoned retail and light industrial on all of those roads. So there is opportunity for additional development along that road. The problem is I'm still not sure that the traffic warrants a road that large, because the vast majority of that traffic is coming in to go to the casino. We're not even talking about like Lions games traffic going over there. That happens, you know, obviously sometimes, but I'm not sure if it's really worth all that. But beyond that, when you go to every other city in the United States, plenty of stadiums don't sit right next to the freeway. Plenty of stadiums you have to kind of do. I just went to Soldier Field not too long ago. You have to kind of go up Lakeshore Drive and do this weird U-turn and do all this kind of stuff, and that sounds frustrating, but we were in traffic for a grand total of 7 minutes as opposed to 15 because we're trying our best to get to the freeway. It is a weird thing to think about. Do I think it can connect downtown to Lafayette Park? Sure. But I just don't see how you do it without knocking some more stuff down.
I think that you could keep a lot of your stuff. I think there's enough room, especially when you fill in that area. But to me, it's more about what kind of roads you put in there, where you could do creative things that for special events, maybe you send both lanes in a certain direction. Like there's things you could do if you're like, oh, Lions game, it's going to be crazy. For 30 minutes, we make both lanes, like we do something with both sides or something like that. There's traffic control things you can do to handle special events where you don't have to ruin it for all the things. If you put in a road that is that wide on both sides, and we're talking, 4 or 5 lanes on a side in some cases, you're going to end up creating another barrier. And we need to think about human, right? We need to think about human scale, and then we could build all the way up into where that stuff is. Because you've got those new apartments that are being built that are right next to the freeway currently. Those Mies van der Rohes, those are historically designated at this point. Mm-hmm. And they're some of the highest, frankly, valued developments in the city right now. That census tract, I think, don't quote me, but I think it's one of, if not the most wealthy census tracts in Detroit. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things happening there, but it's about creating those connections.
Exactly.
Another thing we got some feedback on, and this is over the last few months, we often get this question of why, and it's always from someone from the suburbs, why can't they get a free City of Detroit library card for the library system?
You don't live in the city of Detroit.
So let's talk about this for a second, because I think, especially among younger folks, there isn't this understanding of how our system is right now. I feel like this is a teaching moment, because you can get a non-resident library card.
Absolutely. You got to pay for it, though.
It's $100.
Yeah.
Right? And because you have to pay into the system, because we don't generally have many regional systems here. And I, at first, was like, we've had this conversation 50 times over the years. But I have to remember, at my, as you've reminded me, as other people have reminded me, my AARP specialness, I realize that we have to repeat this conversation every few years, because new people come in or new people are aware, and they don't understand that our system does not work regionally for almost anything.
No. And listen, let me just say this, okay? Most public libraries function on the fact that if you live in that town, you live in that municipality, you could go and get a library card for free. If you're a non-resident, you probably got to pay for it. Some may offer free library cards. I haven't encountered them that much. So here's the thing. What irritates me as somebody who was born and raised in the city is Why do you feel entitled to have anything for free in the city of Detroit and you don't live there? Period. You know, we have things like the Detroit Public Schools Promise, which is modeled after the Kalamazoo Promise for children who go to Detroit Public Schools. They're able to go to schools in state with much of their tuition covered. Do you think that you should be entitled to something like that as well? It's a very innocuous question to ask just because people go like, it's a library card. It's not a big deal. People don't even read books anymore. But it's the energy. It's the entitlement. It's the thought that, hey, Detroit doesn't have a lot of people. Nobody uses the library. They don't care. I'll just waltz in and get something for free. No. It's a very presumptuous way to view the city. And I think we see that play out in many ways and in many aspects, whereas you want to come down and get all the cool stuff and participate in all the free stuff. But when it comes crunch time for you to actually participate with the city of Detroit, these municipalities will do everything in their power to vote for people who don't want to participate with the city. So if you want a free library card, elect people who would be okay with that. Elect people who want to, cooperate with the city. And then maybe we could get a regional partnership on something like that. But, y'all keep voting for isolationists. So I have no sympathy for you. Go to your library in your own town or move to Detroit. Very simple situation.
I will want to extend, and you know me, Norris, I want to extend some grace, especially if somebody is new or younger that they just don't know. But what you're explaining to me feels like the definition of a microaggression.
Yeah, it's 1,000%. And I'm not trying to put quite this strong of a word on it, but it's the only one I can think about. But it's a very colonial way of thinking. It's sort of like, hey, I just got here and I'm dropping down, and now I want all the things. Give me all the stuff that is here to offer. I want all of it. And, I think if you're new to the region, and I sound very aggressive about this, you must understand that this is coming with 30 plus years of baggage. If you are not new here and you're a longtime Metro Detroit resident that lives in the suburbs, you should know better, period.
But also, you can go ahead and pay $100 for a library card and you're more than welcome.
Very simple.
There's a path to that. And I think that's part of the reason why, people get upset about the workers' income tax when they come in and have to do that. Well, there's infrastructure to serve you. And in reality, there are a lot of costs that are attached to all of this stuff. And frankly, It's a bigger part of the city budget than property tax. And in fact, the casinos, we didn't mention this, but the casino workers are on the verge of going on strike in maybe 10 or 11 days because of some issues. In fact, casino revenue brings in more than property taxes, and that strike could definitely be throw a temporary wrench into plans. I haven't talked to anyone about all of the details. I imagine a shorter strike, of course, will have less impact than a longer one, all that other stuff. But that casino revenue is crucial to the city of Detroit, and people are like, well, why does so much get done for the casinos? Well, to be honest, the cities of Ann Arbor and Troy put together have more land value than the city of Detroit.
And that's straight up off property taxes. And this is what I mean is that, like, if we're going to be talking about increasing the city services and increasing those things, those amenities that people really want and care about, people have to move to the city or at bare minimum, buy some land and pay taxes on it. Let's say you just want to help the city out. You're a benevolent person. And you say, listen, I love the city of Detroit, but the reality of me living there is slim to none. So you know what? I'll just buy some land and I'll pay taxes on it and I'll allow some folks to live on that land. Sure, fine, do that. But the point of the matter is that not enough people live in the city that can take advantage of the resources. And so you'll have a city tax. If we were still clearing $1 million plus, Detroit city tax wouldn't be a thing.
Let's get into a couple of other issues. QLINE ridership, often maligned in the media, but it's up. And here's the thing. I've had my criticism of the QLINE because I tell it to people straight, but I overall look at it as a good thing.
Yeah. And, I think the QLINE recently put out their annual report for 2023, which obviously includes a little bit of 2022 as well. I think the most telling finding from it isn't just that ridership is up, it's the who is riding the QLINE. Because there's often this thought that it's pointless, it's only serving tourists, it doesn't go anywhere. And 68%, almost 70% of the QLINE riders are Detroiters, are people who live in the city. 75% of them are people of color. So this concept that it serves only tourists is incorrect. It's just factually incorrect. And I think also what we need to realize about the QLINE is I think this report in this study is a perfect case study of the expansion of the QLINE. And that's what I think they're going to start leaning into. Even if they go along the spoke roads, if you take this along, Grand River, or take this up and along Michigan, it'll probably be Michigan Avenue first to serve Corktown. But this to me is a perfect example of creating something that is not perfect, that, people maligned, but served a segment of the community that everybody else chose to kind of not look at, which is, lower in lower middle class income people of color in the city of Detroit. That's majority of the ridership. So if this goes out and serves other communities, I think you're going to see ridership increase even more. And on top of that, the study also reveals that the vast majority of people support expansion of the QLINE. The city cannot afford to do it. And for as much as I'm not a fan of the privatization of infrastructure, this is going to be the only way we get any semblance of street level rail or subways, or subway's not going to happen, but anything like that, this is the only way it's going to happen in the city of Detroit. And I think the numbers bear out that the people want it.
I think it's also a boon for tourists, which is something that brings in a lot of money to the city and to the area in general. And about the size. Here's the thing. One of the things I've learned over the years is that the Detroit conversation is often suburbanites talking about Detroit, right? Like if you look online, you and I look at both the data, and what we really realized is that so much of the conversation is driven by people who work downtown and then go back home, or they're interested in cool old buildings, and they're all welcome. Like that's for sure. But this is an instance where you create an amenity that everyone's like, well, it's got to go to 8 Mile to be functional. I wonder, does it? Because like when you and I have both been to Brooklyn, you and I have both traveled, like if you design a city properly, everything you need should be within a 3.5 mile line.
You should be able to feasibly, as an able-bodied adult, be able to walk to it. And an able-bodied adult should be able to walk a mile with little effort.
If you're in a place like Brooklyn or other places, like you want to go to Five Below, you don't need to go to 8 Mile. You just go to the other subway stop, right? Like I really realized that scale the last trip I was in Brooklyn and paid attention, right? Because I've been before to New York and, you're just there, right? You're not paying attention. But when you pay attention, realize I'm only going like 3 or 4 miles. I'm not going that far. Like in actuality on the map, it feels that way, but I'm not. And so if you can go to all of those things and have those things available, it's a different thing. When I was in Chicago, I'm going to post up a TikTok, I went to a City Target. That's all I'd ever need. Like, it's fine. Does it have clothes? No, but I'm not really a Target clothes shopper. But like, those are the kinds of things that if you were to actually put that in the route, all of a sudden that whole thing becomes so much more practical and usable for having those kinds of things tied to it, and ties together those multiple neighborhoods. So from the south end to the north end, through Milwaukee Junction, New Center, Midtown, all of them. And then you create something that's actually cohesive and urban. So as I've said before, I'm starting to change my thoughts on this, only because I realize the view of many people about it is from a position that is different. And if you're going to do a longer service thing, you probably need BRT first. And like that's what you're probably going to get more money for than you're going to do, say, rail.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. But I think as we look more towards what the data shows, because even with BRT, as we've reported and talked about on the show, the political will to even expand BRT isn't there. Again, it just, we have to be honest and realistic about what the reality is. But what we're seeing with the QLINE is there is appetite to expand that. And that is something that would be done within the city of Detroit with private partners and specifically serving the city of Detroit. Before we even get to the BRT question and doing more with that, I feel like this is actually more feasible, because you don't need any of those outside elements. And so, sure, the suburbanites can come in and use the QLINE and have a great time and go to all the games and all that stuff. But if you serve Detroiters and you serve the city of Detroit, we'll support you. As a native Detroiter, if you support us, we gonna support you back. And I think this is gonna be one of the things that moving forward, if it expands, could begin to change the landscape, at least of those sort of central areas and central neighborhoods.
I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time. Back during the L. Brooks Patterson days, I wrote a piece about a coalition of the willing and saying, if Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County, and Wayne want to do something, why don't we just do it? Because back then, there was no thought until L. Brooks Patterson left office that was ever going to happen. And I wonder if some sort of line that goes from Ann Arbor through the airport would be something that will happen first before something that hits Oakland County, just because of that willingness.
Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you, if you did something like that, because listen, there's already an Amtrak route that does that. But the thing about it is the Amtrak route doesn't take you downtown to downtown Detroit. So if you run QLINE from downtown Detroit on through Corktown, you find a route that takes you around through Dearborn even, and then out to the airport into Ann Arbor, dude, you talking about something that is going to be used heavily every day, heavily. Sure, maybe right now it stands that the QLINE is a free service, and I think that definitely helps when it comes to the ridership. But even if you said, hey, the route out to the airport is going to cost you $5, man, you know how many people I would use it? I would drive 15 minutes to go to Ann Arbor to take the QLINE back the other way because it'd just be more convenient and cheaper.
I mean, there is that Ann Arbor bus that did launch. You're doing a pilot program, but it's also kind of weird to ride it.
Yeah, but buses suck.
That's really what it comes down to, right? Like, let's just be honest, right? Like
buses are everybody's least favorite mode of transportation, I would argue.
Although very practical and a big part of many city system, I feel like that is absolutely the feeling. Like, I think there's a lot of people who will take a rail who won't take a bus.
Yeah, I'm one of them. I'll admit it.
And finally, the Michigan House earlier this week gave approval to HOV lanes, high occupancy vehicle lanes, for the first time in the state's history. This is going to be on I-75. These lanes were required as part of the federal government funding a large chunk of this I-75 expansion in Oakland County. It's one of those things. I've driven up I-75 a ton of times. Of course, to me, whenever you add lanes, you don't actually fix congestion problems. You just kick it down the can and there'll be congestion problems later because induced demand is a real thing. Go look it up. But these HOV lanes, what are your thoughts? It would be for, say, buses, for people who have more than one person in the car, that kind of thing. It's a big step, just like the first transit-only lane in Detroit was outside of LCA recently. Like, these are steps forward we haven't seen in 40 years.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about the concept of this in Metro Detroit, because obviously so many other municipalities have them. But I think what's going to end up happening is the same thing that happened with roundabouts here in Metro Detroit, which is people will use them begrudgingly and they'll hate the concept of it. Because for me, I look at an HOV lane and I say, well, does it really help anything? I mean, for buses, sure. For those little small vans, the church bus, the church van, sure. Other than that, I just want to use the left lane to go past you, bruh. And, so for me, I'm not sure what it does. Some people like HOV lanes. I don't know if it really makes any difference. I would love to see the full data on it and be proven right, proven right or wrong. I don't have enough data, but I just think people are going to see this and they're going to say, oh my God, even more construction on 75, the last thing I want.
Well, I mean, these things are already built in. There's even signage up in parts. But Here's the thing. Like, I feel like there is an element of anything with local stuff that people just hate change. Like, it doesn't matter what the change is, even if it's good or bad. Like, there are areas roundabouts are good, in my opinion. There's areas that roundabouts maybe don't make sense. Like, the thing is that I think a lot of people just don't like any kind of change. And so they're going to be begrudging about it. I am interested to see more data about it. I do know that, this is something that had to be fulfilled because the feds are very big on kind of these things. And look, I-75 can be a mess. I took it over the weekend and it was, again, still kind of a pain in the tail in Southern Oakland County. Yeah.
I mean, 75 by far is my least favorite freeway in Metro Detroit to drive on.
Really?
By far. Yeah, by far. Let me say this. 75, once you get north of 8 Mile, is by far my least favorite highway. The Davidson is too short to care. 96 is magnificent and great to drive on no matter where you are. The Lodge is the Autobahn, so that could be fun sometimes. And, 94, now that they're, putting some extra lanes in down by Wayne State and all that, is a better freeway. 75 is just because so many people live in Southern Oakland County. Man, the moment you get into Hazeltucky, you just get ready.
Oh, geez.
Get ready.
You're going to get mail from like 6 different constituencies with this one sentence.
No, get ready. And it's from a traffic point of view. And then once you get into the Spaghetti Junction up there between 75 and 696, past that, it's getting even worse because it's just dense. It's nobody's fault. It's just a lot of people up there.
I'm going to have the contrarian opinion that I don't really, this freeway expansion I think is a little too much. My least favorite freeway is none of the ones you mentioned. I would nuke the Southfield. I hate the Southfield.
See, as somebody who grew up very close to the Southfield is near and dear to my heart. I'll say this, it's the most pointless freeway, but it is pointless. However, driving on it, I've never had too many issues. So the Southfield, I'm probably the most indifferent.
I feel like the Southfield's the Lodge's rougher cousin.
Yeah, it can be sometimes, but people still drive somewhat. In my experience, people drive somewhat responsibly on the Southfield. On the Lodge, I mean, if you don't have a roll cage on the car, you gotta be careful.
Oh, jeez. Norris Howard, so good to talk to you.
Always good to join you on the show, Jer.
Absolutely. You can find him at Great Laker Nori on Twitter. Feedback, dailydetroit@gmail.com, 313-789-3211. With that, I am Jer Stays. Tomorrow, John McElroy from AutoLine will be joining us to talk about the latest on the UAW strike and, of course, Fridays with Devin O'Reilly. So until next time, remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you around Detroit.